Let's move on to this grip here now. We're going to start with a cylinder. We're going to create it in the left view because then the cylinder will already start out with the correct orientation. If we just drag from the center of the blade, then the grip should be centered on the guard here. And it looks like last time I made a cylinder I had a lot of segments. Just going to turn that to 1. So our grip is a little bit skinnier than the one in the photo, and if we make it any fatter, then we're going to have a grip that is spilling over the edges of our guard here. So I guess we should fatten our guard a bit. Next we want to get some of this shape we have here in the photo. So I'm just going to make it an editable poly. Go into edge mode and use Alt-R to get a ring selection and Control-Shift-E to add an edge loop in there. Now I want to make this end cap smaller, and I could go into polygon mode and then go into perspective mode and grab this end, but it would be nice to do it all without leaving the front view here. So if we went into edge mode and tried to grab these end edges, we would select a bunch of other edges that we didn't want. Of course, we could go into vert mode and select these verts, and that would do the trick for us. However, I want to show you guys something up here called window crossing. It's a toggle, and now things will only become selected when you marquee around them completely. So since we weren't completely encompassing these edges, we were just crossing over them a bit, it didn't actually select them. But we were completely encompassing these end edges, so it did indeed select them. Same goes for polygon mode. So if we try to select these polygons will not select. The only polygon that selected was this end polygon here. However, if I completely encompass these polygons with a marquee, then they select. So that can help you in some specific situations. Just make that a little smaller, go into edge mode, Alt-R, Control-Shift-E. And it looks like in our photo we might have a little bit of a taper at the end here. So I can do that just with a bevel. Just grab this polygon end, do a bevel. I'll show you guys one more selection tool here. In addition to ring and loop, we have shrink and grow, which will essentially just select one adjacent polygon to our selection. So if we grow this selection, you see that it selected all of the adjacent polygons. And if we shrink it, well, it kind of shrinks our selection. So if we just select that end polygon and click grow, we can easily get the selection for this end here to move it in to make it more flush with our guard. And I want to do one bevel on this end. Now I want to try to pull off this wrapped leather actually in the model. We could do it in the texture, but I think it'll look better in the model. So the method I'm going to use for doing it is going to be a little bit convoluted, and I had to try a couple different methods to finally settle on this one. So I want you guys to know that not everything in 3D is going to be straightforward, and oftentimes you're going to have to try all kinds of random garbage to finally come up with a method. That kind of problem solving is part of the fun of 3D in my opinion. My basic plan is to use the cut tool to cut a spiral down the length of my cylinder. But it's pretty hard to just eyeball where I want to place those cuts, so I'm going to make a little guide for it first by making essentially a giant strip and then using a twist modifier on that strip, and I'm just going to kind of cut behind that like a guide. So first thing I need to do is make my strip, and that strip is going to be a plane with a bunch of subdivisions in it that will be roughly the length of my grip. And just from the last time I did it, it already has a ton of width segments. So we want one length segment or width segment depending on how you drew your plane, and then just a ton of segments along the length of our grip. And the reason why we need them is so that when we add the twist modifier in a second here, we have enough geometry for it to make a smooth twist. Now I'm just going to kind of put it up near our grip, and I'm going to move it to the very edge here, and then I'm going to add a twist modifier. And you can see that we have an angle parameter here, but when I increase it, it doesn't really seem to do much. But that's because our twist center is right in the center of this plane, and it's not really going to do much until we grab the center, just like we could grab the mirror with the symmetry modifier, and actually move it to the center of our grip. Now it's trying to twist on the wrong axis, so That's also the wrong axis. Now we have our plane twisting all the way around our grip. And the idea of this isn't actually to use this for anything. I just want this to be a guide as to where I'm going to put my cuts. So my plan here is to cut all the way around this grip. And that seems like it's going to take a long time and be a headache, but it's really not that bad once we just get into it. So it looks like I want this to twist a few more times by the time it gets to the end. So maybe I'll increase this. There we go, that looks to be good. I'm gonna click on the top of my hierarchy and then click on my grip. Go into edge mode and start cutting along this. So when we get to a point where we need to rotate our camera, we simply right click to get out of cut mode and start a new cut and just pick up from where we left off. Sometimes it can be a little difficult to actually see where we left off. So to help me out with that, I'm going to switch to vertex mode, and then at least I'll have a little red dot to see. Just going to continue my cut right through these bottom segments here, all the way to the bottom. Now I can go ahead and delete this object since it was just a guide, and we have ourselves a nice swirling cut around our entire grip. As a safety measure, I'm going to go into vertex mode and press Ctrl A and run a weld, and that's just in case I kind of missed one of the verts and it didn't properly snap and I ended up with 2 verts at the beginning of my cut. It looks like that didn't happen though, since my number isn't changing. But if there were 2 verts really close together, then this would take care of that. Now that we have this cut, it won't be hard to make the little grooves between the leather straps. So just need to go into edge mode, and we already have the selection just because by default, after you're done using the cut tool, it selects whatever it just cut. If we didn't have the selection for whatever reason, we could easily just select one and press Alt L to get its loop. And then we can use chamfer. Then we can just determine how much space we want. That might be good. And now I want to make a little groove. And to do that, I'd like to bevel this little strip of polygons, bevel it inward to make for a little groove. However, this selection is going to be, you know, a little bit tedious. We could do it. It wouldn't take that long, but it's going to be a lot easier to use ring selection. Now to select a ring of faces, we simply go into edge mode, press Alt R to get a ring of edges, and then we can right click on this selection and go to convert to face. And then we'll have a ring of faces. Now we can just use the bevel tool. I'm going to use the dialog here to give us a little more control. And it's all wonky. And it looks like it's all trying to go in one direction. We want it to go with the direction of the normal. So if we click local normal, now you'll see it's all going out in the right direction. And we want it to go in instead of go out, and we don't want it to inset quite so much. Now we can select these edges as well and press Alt L and then chamfer them. Now for very small chamfers, I like to use the dialog because it's hard to have enough mouse control to do a small chamfer, and do a very small amount. Now we have that leather wrapping around our sword grip. We have a little bit of madness going on here, but we can clean that up. Now looking at the reference, I'm seeing that maybe there's a little bit of concave going on. Maybe not, but even if there's not, we can certainly take artistic liberties. So I'm just going to grab a ring of edges. Actually, all of these edges. Maybe not those. And I'm going to do a connect on them. There we go. And just resize them to go in a little. Just a very tiny bit. Now we have that effect. The smoothing groups are all wonky on these. So I'm going to select all of my polygons and see what an auto smooth will give us. Now for this little nightmare, I have a very scientific method of cleaning stuff like this up. It's pretty complicated, so watch closely and pay attention. There, done. Moving on to the pommel. To finish up this dagger, we're going to be modeling this pommel you see here. And we're actually not going to use any new tools. We're not going to learn any new things per se for the creation of this pommel. The only thing it might be is review for all of the stuff that we have learned so far, and some possible insight into a little bit more technique with the tools. But if you feel like you have a really firm grasp on everything we've learned, then you'll be able to skip over the entire rest of this chapter and you will be totally fine, I think. So I'm going to make this thing mostly in perspective view, probably, and start with the simple box. You can hold Control to constrain your dimensions to a square. Interesting, I didn't even know you could place stuff on the bottom of the floor plane like that. Just going to try to get the proportions right off the bat. Then I'm going to use the cut tool to make a cross in the top here so I could have that indent. And I use the cut tool to cut down the sides here. To get the bottom looking just like the top, I just deleted that face and just shift drug inward and collapsed all those verts down into the middle. Now something notable is going on right now. I'm trying to scale these inward, but I'm getting some really weird wonkiness. The top is scaling inward, but the bottom is scaling outward, or vice versa. And that is due to a thing that I haven't showed you guys. So I said we weren't going to learn anything new, but actually we are. And to those of you who skipped this part, I tricked you. We have a little setting right to the right of the reference coordinate system called Use Pivot Center. And we can actually click and hold on that to change it. And what it's going to do is either scale or rotate or move our selection either based on the midpoint between our entire selection or based on the individual origins of each. Now that's not a very good example of showing you it in action, so I'm just going to dupe off a face here and dupe another one. And now here is it rotating on individual origins. And if I choose median point, then you can see they rotate kind of around a midpoint between them. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. Now we're easily able to scale these in to give it that shape. Perhaps I've gone a little too far with it, so I'm just backing off a little. And I'm using loop selection to get the top and bottom here. And then I'm just going to chamfer all of that. And I noticed that the pommel's a little bit crude and just wonky, so I'm trying to add that in a little by just pushing some verts around. And also chamfering the corners there. Although now that I am watching myself, I see that I forgot one, so I'll get that. Now just putting it, using an auto smooth on it, and giving this a little chamfer. And you can actually change the amount of segments you want for the chamfer in the settings for the tool. And just rotating it into place. Now I'm just going to get to a couple pickups that I forgot to do. The first being this corner. And I realized after looking at my reference that the little butt of the pommel here goes out instead of inward. And I want to clean up this end. I don't want that big end gone back there, so I'm doing the little collapse vertex trick. And then I'm just going to drop a turbo smooth on there and tighten up the edges with one extra edge loop. And I think I'll call that done. And here's just kind of a final vanity render for the modeling portion of our dagger. In the very next chapter, you guys will learn the final piece to this puzzle and be well on your way to 3D stardom with UV mapping.